They say the Nile never sleeps, but sometimes it dreams. The water was dark that night, almost black under the curve of a new moon. The lanterns along the riverbank flickered in the warm Cairo wind, throwing wavering gold onto the rippling surface. Hassan al-Rashid leaned against his wooden staff and listened. He had walked this same stretch of river every night for 37 years, guarding the warehouses, watching the cargo boats slide through the shadows, keeping an old promise to a city that never thanked him. But that night, something was different. The river was whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then he thought it was the reeds brushing the water. And then he heard it again, a low murmur like a woman's voice beneath the surface, singing in a language he did not know but somehow felt he understood. The sound moved with the current, curling around the stone pillars and broken pottery at the edge of the water. He stepped closer. Hassan. The voice said his name. The old man froze. The night grew still. Even the frogs stopped croaking. He tightened his grip on the staff, his heart thudding like a drum in his chest. He whispered back, "Who calls me?" No answer. Only the whispering of the Nile. By morning, Hassan told himself it was a dream. Cairo was a city of 1,000 echoes. Wind in the alleys, prayers at dawn, the creaking of old boats. But that night, the whisper returned. And the next. Each time, the voice grew clearer. Each time, it said the same thing. Find what was forgotten.
Hassan didn't tell anyone. Who would believe an old night guard who claimed the river was talking to him? But the voice began to follow him. In his sleep, in the rustle of papyrus sheets, even in the soft hum of the minarets at dusk. After the 5th night, he decided to go to Khan el-Khalili, the old market where merchants sold everything from ancient coins to false relics. There, in a corner stall beneath a faded awning, sat Yusef the collector, a man who traded in secrets. "Yusef," Hassan began, placing a handful of worn coins on the table. "Tell me about the voice of the Nile." The collector raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the river's voice," he said, leaning forward. "Some say it speaks only to those who carry old blood. Some say it remembers what men have forgotten. What did it tell you, Hassan?" Hassan hesitated. "It told me to find what was forgotten." Yusef's smile faded. He reached under the counter and pulled out a rolled piece of brittle parchment bound with red thread. "This," he whispered, "was found near Amarna, the city of the heretic king Akhenaten. The priest said the river swallowed part of his city to punish his blasphemy. Maybe it's trying to return what it took." He slid the parchment across the table. Hassan opened it. Inside was a crude map drawn centuries ago, showing the Nile's curve and a mark deep in the desert, the Chamber of Light. That night, the voice came again, louder, clearer, urgent. "Go south, Hassan, to the place where the river bends toward the sun." He didn't sleep. By dawn, he had packed a small satchel, a lantern, a blanket, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, and the old parchment. He told his neighbors he was visiting family in Luxor. In truth, he followed the voice. The train south was slow and rattling, passing through the wide arms of the desert. Hassan sat by the window, watching the dunes shimmer like molten gold. Every so often he saw ruins rise from the horizon, broken pillars, temples half buried in sand, statues with faces eroded by time. Egypt was full of ghosts, and he felt them watching. At dusk, the train reached Luxor, the ancient city once called Thebes, the heart of the pharaohs. The air smelled of dust, incense, and faraway rain. A young boy approached him at the station. "Are you Hassan al-Rashid?" he asked. Hassan frowned. "Who are you, boy?" "The river told me to find you," the boy said simply. The boy's name was Amir. He was 12, thin as a reed, with eyes as dark as the river at night. He claimed his father was a fisherman who vanished years ago, taken, he said, by the ones who guard the water. Hassan wanted to laugh it off, but the child's calm voice reminded him of the whispers. So he let the boy guide him through the narrow streets of Luxor to a small mud house near the riverbank. Inside, the walls were painted with strange patterns, spirals, eyes, and the symbol of the Ankh. "My grandmother painted these," Amir said. "She said they protect us from what sleeps beneath the sand." Hassan studied the walls. The symbols were ancient, older than Arabic, older than Greek. "Does your grandmother still live here?" he asked. Amir shook his head. "She went to the river 3 nights ago. She said the time has come." Something cold stirred in Hassan's chest. That night he dreamed again, but this time he saw her, a woman standing in the water, her skin the color of moonlight, wearing a crown shaped like a cobra. Behind her rose golden walls and an enormous sun carved into stone. She looked at him with eyes full of sorrow and command. "Find me, Hassan. Bring back the light." When he woke, Amir was standing beside him, holding the old parchment. "She came to you too," the boy said softly. "The Queen of the Sun." The next day they began their journey into the desert. They borrowed 2 camels from a local trader and followed the maps south toward Amarna, the lost city of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The wind was hot and the sky burned white. The dunes stretched endlessly, swallowing all sound but the groan of the camel's steps. As they rode, Hassan told Amir the old stories, how Akhenaten turned his back on all the gods of Egypt to worship only the sun, Aten, and how after his death the priests destroyed his city to erase his name. "But some say," Hassan added, "his queen, Nefertiti, vanished before that. No tomb was ever found. Some say she became one with the river, the light that never dies." Amir nodded solemnly. "Then maybe the river is calling her back." By the 3rd day, they reached the edge of a forgotten valley. The sand there was different, fine and pale, glittering under the sun as though mixed with crushed glass. In the distance stood a crumbling stone arch, half buried and almost invisible. Hassan dismounted and brushed the sand away from its surface. There were carvings, a sun disk, 2 figures kneeling, and hieroglyphs that read, "To those who remember, light shall return."
Behind the arch, they found a narrow stairway leading down into the earth. Amir's voice trembled. "It's a tomb." "No," said Hassan, lighting his lantern. "It's a memory." They descended carefully. The air grew cooler. The walls shimmered with traces of gold leaf, long faded. At the bottom was a chamber filled with broken jars and fragments of painted stone. In the center stood a sealed doorway, its surface carved with the same cobra-crowned woman from Hassan's dream. He reached out and touched the door. The stone was warm, as if alive. And then the whisper again, soft but unmistakable. "You have come far, child of the river. Now remember." The light from his lantern flared and went out. When it returned, they were no longer in dark. The light from his lantern flared and went out. When it returned, they were no longer in darkness. The walls of the chamber glowed faintly, covered in scenes of ancient life, children playing beside the Nile, priests lifting offerings to the sun, the queen standing beside her king, smiling. Amir gasped, "She's here!" A gentle wind swept through the room, though there was no opening. Hassan felt the hairs on his arms rise. From the carvings themselves came a soft, echoing voice, the same one from the river. "The world forgets, but the Nile remembers. You, Hassan, are its keeper." The lantern flickered again, and the glow faded. The air was still. Amir whispered, "What did she mean?" Hassan didn't answer. He knelt by the wall, tracing the carved lines of the queen's face. She seemed almost alive, her eyes following him with quiet knowing. He thought of the nights by the river, the whispers, the map. Maybe this was never about finding treasure. Maybe it was about remembering. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the sound of rushing water, though the Nile was miles away. Hassan looked toward the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the dunes, and he felt it again, the ancient pulse of Egypt, deep and eternal, flowing beneath his feet like a buried river. He turned to Amir. "We must go back," he said softly. "There's more to find, not here, but in the water itself." Amir nodded, eyes wide. "Then we go where the Nile begins." And as the last light of day faded, the voice of the river whispered once more, "The journey has only begun." The desert does not forget. It only waits for someone brave enough to listen. The morning after their discovery, the sun rose heavy and golden over the dunes. Hassan and Amir stood at the mouth of the hidden stairway, the hot wind lifting grains of sand like smoke. Behind them lay the whispering chamber, silent once more, as if it had exhaled all its secrets into the air and fallen back to sleep. Hassan watched the horizon. "The river is calling us home," he said quietly. "Our answers are not in the sand, but in the water itself." Amir looked back toward the ruins. "Do you think she's gone?" "No," Hassan said, his voice low. "She never left. Queens do not die. They become stories." They packed their belongings and began the long journey back to Luxor. The desert stretched endlessly, the sand whispering against their robes. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, Hassan thought he heard faint music, a rhythm like drums carried from far away, from some unseen celebration buried beneath time. By the second night, they camped near the ruins of an old temple. Its walls were broken, but the carvings remained. Lines of priests, the eye of Horus, and a single line written in hieroglyphs that Hassan murmured aloud. "From the sun we come, to the river we return." Amir stirred the campfire. "Do you think it means the queen went back into the river?" Hassan nodded. Perhaps her tomb was not built in stone. Perhaps it was built in water. They reached Luxor 3 days later. The city was alive with sound, markets buzzing, bells from distant boats, children laughing by the river. Yet to Hassan, everything felt quieter than before. The ordinary world seemed pale after the voice of the desert. He went first to the docks, where the boats of fishermen and merchants swayed gently against the current. The river looked calm, innocent, yet Hassan could sense the pulse beneath it. He whispered, "I'm back." The surface rippled, though no wind blew. Amir gasped softly, "She heard you." That night, they stayed in the small mud house again. The symbols on the wall seemed to glow faintly under the lamplight. Hassan could not sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the silver shimmer of the Nile, when he saw it, a light beneath the water, like a torch moving slowly against the current. Without thinking, he rose, took his lantern, and stepped outside. Amir followed. They walked down to the water's edge. The light grew brighter, pulsing rhythmically as though the river itself had a heartbeat. Then, through the quiet night, a whisper came, soft, melodic, ancient. "Follow the current to where the river bends toward the past." The next morning, they rented a small wooden sailboat from an old ferryman named Mahmoud, who recognized Hassan immediately. "Still chasing dreams, old friend?" he teased, squinting against the sun. "Not dreams," Hassan said. "Memories." Mahmoud chuckled, but agreed to take them upriver. The sail caught the wind, and the boat glided smoothly along the wide, glittering water. On either side, palm trees waved gently, and beyond them lay the open sands of history, fields of buried temples and forgotten kings. Hassan sat at the bow, eyes half closed, listening. Sometimes the wind brought the faint echo of voices, chanting, singing, perhaps the sound of the old gods calling through time. Amir leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the water. "It's so clear," he said. "I can see the bottom." Hassan looked too, and froze. Beneath the surface, just for an instant, he saw what looked like the top of a wall. Not rocks, not sand, but stone, carved and squared, the color of gold. "Mahmoud," he said sharply, "stop the boat." The ferryman pulled the sail and steadied the vessel. Hassan kneeled, reaching into the water. The current was gentle here, cool against his skin. He could feel something smooth beneath the ripples, a shape buried just under the silt. Amir's eyes widened. "It's a building." "Yes," whispered Hassan. "A city." They anchored near the shore and waded into the shallow water. Bit by bit, Hassan brushed away the sand beneath the surface, revealing faint carvings, symbols of the sun and lotus flowers, all facing east. It was real. There, hidden for centuries, lay the remains of a city, a place swallowed by the Nile long before history remembered its name. By sunset, they had uncovered the top of what looked like a doorway. On its surface was the same cobra-crowned woman again, the queen of the sun. Amir looked at Hassan, trembling. "It's her." "Yes," he said, voice barely a whisper. "We found her city, Zahra el-Shems, the city of light." That night, they lit a small fire by the shore. Mahmoud shook his head in disbelief. "You know, Hassan, I ferried archaeologists, soldiers, even treasure hunters. But you listen to the river and find what they never could." Hassan smiled faintly. "Because they dig for gold. I listen for truth." Amir stared at the dark water. "What now?" "We go below," said Hassan, "at dawn." When the first light of morning touched the river, they returned with ropes and oil lamps. The water was cold, but clear. They dove together, Hassan first, then Amir, then Mahmoud holding the ropes above. Beneath the surface, the world was still. Sunlight poured down in golden beams, revealing outlines of pillars and walls beneath layers of silt. Fish darted between cracks in the stone. Hassan's heart pounded as he swam deeper. He saw carvings on the walls, lines of worshippers, the disk of the sun, and hieroglyphs untouched by time. Then, through the veil of water, he saw an archway half buried in mud. He reached it and brushed the surface clean, revealing one single word: Nefertiti. The same name the world had been searching for since the tombs of the valley were opened. The missing queen, the lost mother of light. Hassan surfaced, gasping for air. "It's her!" he shouted. "It's truly her!" Mahmud's eyes widened. "You found the queen's tomb?" "No," said Hassan, panting. "Her memory, her truth." For days they worked, carefully clearing silt and sand from the submerged structures. Word spread quickly through Luxor. Villagers came whispering prayers. Even a few British archaeologists arrived, curious and skeptical. But none could deny the carvings, the unmistakable likeness of Nefertiti, and the inscription naming her Mistress of Light and Water. One archaeologist, Dr. Evelyn Hart, examined the site with wonder. "This changes everything," she murmured. "No one believed her tomb could be beneath the Nile. It's as if she wanted to return to the source of life itself." Hassan said nothing. He knew the truth went deeper still. The river had not just kept her body, it had kept her story. That night, as the camp settled and the archaeologists slept, Hassan sat by the shore. The moon shimmered across the rippling water like liquid silver. He whispered, "I found you." From the dark, the voice came again, soft, grateful. "And in finding me, you have found yourself." Hassan closed his eyes. The breeze carried the scent of lotus and myrrh. He felt the gentle pull of the current around his feet, as though the Nile itself was breathing. The voice continued, "Tell them I was never lost. The river remembers all who love the light." By morning, the archaeologists had begun their official excavation. Newspapers from Cairo sent photographers. The world buzzed with excitement about the sunken city. Yet for Hassan, there was no need for fame. He stood with Amir at the water's edge, watching the workers lower tools and ropes into the shimmering blue. "Will they find her?" Amir asked. "Maybe, but they won't hear her." Amir looked puzzled. "Then why did—" "Maybe, but they won't hear her." Amir looked puzzled. "Then why did the river call you?" Hassan smiled faintly. "Because I still listen." He turned his gaze downstream, where the Nile wound its endless path toward the sea. Somewhere in its depths, the Queen's voice would forever whisper, not of curses or treasure, but of memory, of light, and of the eternal song of Egypt. That evening, as the sun sank low, the sky turned crimson and gold. Mahmud packed the sailboat ready to return to Cairo. Hassan placed a small jar of river water on the sand, an offering to the Queen. "Goodbye," he whispered. And from the far horizon, carried on the wind, came the faintest reply, "Not goodbye, only remember." The river shimmered once more and then fell silent. But in its quiet, Hassan felt peace, the kind of peace only the Nile could give, deep and ancient, where time itself flowed like water. Some say a curse protects the past, but others know it is only memory refusing to be forgotten. The days that followed were unlike any Hassan had ever known. By morning, the riverbank buzzed with workers and scholars. By night, the whispering of the Nile seemed louder, restless, as if the water itself could feel the digging. The archaeologists had arrived from Cairo, men in white shirts and wide hats, their hands trembling with excitement. They measured, photographed, and cataloged every stone they could reach beneath the water. And everywhere, people whispered the same thing. A new tomb has been found, perhaps greater than Tutankhamun's. Hassan stayed apart from the crowd. He sat quietly near the shore with Amir, watching the foreign scientists shout in English and Arabic. Mahmoud, ever the ferryman, helped row supplies from one side of the bank to the other, muttering under his breath. "They dig like they're chasing gold," he said, shaking his head, "but the river gives nothing it does not wish to give." Hassan nodded. He knew the truth of that. That night, while the campfires flickered along the water, Dr. Evelyn Hart approached him. Her face was lit by lamplight, her expression curious but kind. "You were the one who found the site, weren't you?" she asked softly. Hassan nodded. "And you heard the river?" He hesitated. Most outsiders mocked such talk, but there was something in her eyes, gentle, unafraid. "Yes," he said finally, "the Nile spoke to me. It said the city remembered." Dr. Hart smiled faintly. "Then you and I may understand each other better than most. I've always believed the ancients left messages not in gold or stone, but in sound, frequencies that only some can feel." She handed him a small notebook, filled with careful sketches of hieroglyphs from the site. "Look here," she said, pointing to a set of symbols carved on one of the submerged walls. "This isn't just decoration. It's a warning." Hassan traced the drawings with his finger. The hieroglyphs showed a serpent, a river, and a sun setting behind two figures. Beneath it, she had translated the text, "When memory is disturbed, the river will weep." He looked up at her. "A curse?" "Not in the Western sense, more like a promise." By the second week, strange things began to happen. The water level of the Nile near the site began to rise suddenly each night, as if pushed by invisible tides. Boats moored along the bank drifted loose, and the air grew heavy with the smell of lotus and earth. One morning, a worker found hieroglyphs newly exposed on a stone column that none had seen before, words that hadn't been visible the day before. No one had touched the column. Dr. Hart called it capillary sand movement. Hassan called it the Queen remembering. And every night, he heard the whisper again. "Do not let them take my story." The voice was no longer soft. It carried sorrow now, and something deeper, fear. One evening, Hassan sat by the water with Amir. The boy was skipping stones, though his aim was poor. Each stone sank with a soft plop, swallowed instantly by the river. "Do you think she's angry?" Amir asked suddenly. Hassan looked out at the fading light. "No, not angry. She is awake." Amir frowned. "But why now?" Hassan said simply, "Because we remembered her. When a name is spoken, it returns to life." He turned to the small jar of river water in his hands, the one he had taken as an offering. Inside, the water shimmered faintly, as though it caught a light from nowhere. "Keep this safe," he told Amir. "One day, it will show you the truth." That night, a storm rolled in from the desert. rare and fierce. Lightning split the sky over Luxor, and thunder echoed down the valley like the beating of drums. The camp scrambled to protect the tents and tools, but the rain fell hard, flooding the shallow excavations. Hassan rushed to the riverbank, his lantern barely visible through the downpour. He saw waves crashing against the dig site, as though the Nile itself was fighting to reclaim its own. And then, through the storm, he heard it again. Let it sleep. The water surged, swallowing the edge of the shore. A column collapsed into the waves. Hassan fell to his knees, drenched, shouting into the wind, "I'm not your enemy. I came to listen." The voice replied only once, carried on the thunder, "Then remember me in silence." By dawn, the storm was gone. The sun rose on a changed world. Half the excavation was underwater again, the carved doorway buried beneath new layers of silt. The archaeologists were distraught. Weeks of work had vanished overnight. Dr. Hart approached Hassan, her face pale but resolute. "It's gone," she whispered. "The site has closed itself." Hassan gazed at the calm water. "No," he said softly. "It has gone home." She looked at him, understanding dawning slowly. "You think she chose to hide it again?" "Yes," said Hassan. "Some stories are not meant to be owned, only remembered." That evening the camp packed up. The foreigners would return to Cairo, the officials would file their reports, and the newspapers would soon forget. But Hassan stayed. He sat by the water one last time, the boy Amir beside him, the air warm and still. "Will you ever tell them?" Amir asked. Hassan smiled gently. "I already have. They just don't know how to listen." He leaned down, touched the surface of the Nile, and whispered, "Sleep now, my queen. The world will remember when it is ready." The water rippled once as if in reply, and for the first time in many nights, the river was silent. Years passed. Cairo grew louder, the world changed, but the river remained the same. Slow, patient, eternal. Hassan grew old, his hair white as sand. Amir grew into a young man, strong and thoughtful. On his last night, Hassan called him close. "Do you remember the jar?" Amir nodded. He still kept it, sealed, untouched. "Take it to the river," Hassan said, "when the moon is full. And listen." That night, after Hassan passed, Amir did as he was told. He walked alone to the riverbank under the same crescent moon his grandfather had once watched. The water shimmered silver, endless and calm. He opened the jar and poured its contents gently into the river. The surface glowed where the drops touched it, like stars falling into liquid night. Then came the whisper, softer now, but still clear. "Thank you, child of the river. You have kept the memory." He closed his eyes. He could see her, the queen of the sun, standing in the water once more, her crown gleaming, her eyes full of warmth. "Tell the world. The Nile remembers." When he opened his eyes again, she was gone. Only the river remained, wide and quiet, carrying its eternal song toward the sea. The night fell heavy over Luxor, like a dark velvet curtain drawn across the desert. Amir sat by the Nile again, the water glinting faintly beneath a sky dusted with quiet stars. The air smelled of sand and jasmine, of time and memory. He closed his eyes, listening. The river's voice came soft tonight, like a mother's whisper through a veil. "The queen returns when the moon bows low," it said. "And when the heart believes, the sand remembers." Amir breathed slowly. His body was still, but his mind drifted into the deep hum of the water. He felt it pulling him downward, not in fear, but in peace, as though he were sinking into a dream that was older than the world itself. He saw her then, not with his eyes, but with something deeper, that secret vision that comes only when one forgets where they are. The queen stood at the edge of the desert. Her crown was simple, a golden band around hair the color of night. Her eyes carried galaxies, the same eyes painted on tomb walls and temple pillars, the same eyes that watched over Egypt for 3,000 years. She spoke without moving her lips. "Do you know why the Nile never sleeps?" She turned then, and behind her rose the shadow of a palace, not stone, but made of moonlight. Columns shimmered like water. The air was thick with incense, lotus, and song. The voices of children echoed faintly through time. Amir felt the sand beneath his feet become cool marble. He looked down. His hands were no longer his own, but those of another man, clothed in linen, heavy with gold. He was walking beside the queen. They passed through a great hall filled with torches that burned without flame. The walls were carved with living hieroglyphs, birds that blinked, serpents that slithered along the lines, and suns that pulsed with slow heartbeats. Every word, every symbol was alive. The ancient stories had not died. They had merely fallen asleep beneath the sand. "You came because you listened," said the queen, "and because your blood carries the memory of those who once guarded my secret." Her gaze fell upon him, soft, endless, knowing. "I was never gone, only forgotten." A slow wind rippled through the hall, scattering petals that glowed like embers. Amir felt them brush his face, and suddenly the dream began to fade, the palace dissolving into dust, the queen's figure melting into moonlight. Her last whisper followed him back across the veil. "Tell the world we were more than stone." Amir awoke at dawn. The Nile was still. The mist hung low, like silk drifting over water. In his palm, pressed against his skin, lay a single golden lotus petal, faint, fragile, impossible. He smiled, not in disbelief, but in understanding. He knew now that some dreams were not dreams at all. They were messages, gentle waves sent from eternity, reminders that time is only another name for the river. He watched the sunrise paint the horizon gold, the same color as the queen's eyes, and for a moment Egypt breathed again. The day passed like a dream, half remembered. Amir wandered through Luxor's quiet streets, the scent of dust and spice drifting in the sun. He moved as though between worlds, half in the present, half still lost within the golden echo of the vision. Every face he passed seemed familiar, as if the souls of ancient Egypt still wore the shapes of modern men. A merchant polishing brass lamps, a child running barefoot beside the market stalls, a woman selling dates with eyes that gleamed like the queen's. It was as if the desert itself was watching him. That night, Amir returned again to the riverbank. He sat beneath the same sky, the same moon bending low over the Nile. The water shimmered like liquid silver, patient, eternal, alive. He whispered softly, "I saw her." The Nile did not answer in words. Instead it sighed, a gentle sound that rippled like the breath of something ancient and kind. The reeds swayed, and in their movement came a faint melody, a lullaby woven of air and memory.
It was not music as humans play it, but a vibration that stirred the bones, like a song the earth had been humming since the dawn of time. Amir closed his eyes and listened. The melody became images, drifting, gliding, forming themselves in his thoughts like smoke shaping a story. He saw endless dunes stretching beneath the copper sky. He saw a temple buried to its roof in sand. He saw a young queen kneeling beside a child's tomb, her tears turning into golden dust. And then he heard her voice again, the same calm tone that carried the weight of eternity. The sand remembers what the world forgets. The scene shifted. Now the queen was gone, but her song remained, echoing beneath the dunes. Every grain of sand carried her voice. Every gust of wind carried her sorrow. And Amir understood this was not only her song, it was Egypt's song, the song of a land that never died, only dreamed. When he awoke, dawn was rising once more. The air was cool and clear, and the first rays of sunlight glowed over the river. Something glittered beside him in the sand, a small carved scarab, green as emerald, half buried by the wind. He picked it up gently. On its surface, worn by time, was an inscription in ancient script. The letters were almost gone, but one word still shone clear: Nefer, beautiful. Amir smiled. The queen's message was simple, like the river song. Beauty never truly fades. It only hides until we learn to listen. He closed his fingers around the scarab, feeling its warmth. And for the first time, he was not afraid of the silence. Because now he knew the silence was never empty. It was full of voices. It was full of songs. The nights began to blend together, each one unfolding like a page written in moonlight. Amir no longer tried to chase the dreams. He simply waited for them, sitting by the river until the air itself began to hum. The sound came first, so faint it could have been only the wind, but it carried a rhythm, a slow heartbeat beneath the whispering reeds. He followed it with his eyes closed, and the world around him dissolved into sand and starlight. When he opened them again, he was standing before a temple that did not exist in daylight. Its columns rose from the dunes like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Every stone shimmered as if carved from memory rather than rock. Hieroglyphs glowed faintly along the walls, breathing in time with the desert wind. A soft voice greeted him. "Welcome, listener." It was neither male nor female, young nor old, just calm, like the voice of the Nile itself. Amir stepped forward. "Whose temple is this?" "The temple of dreams, built by those who remembered while the rest forgot. It stands wherever a heart still believes in the unseen." He moved deeper inside. The air smelled of lotus and myrrh. Pools of water reflected the stars as if the heavens had bent down to rest here. He saw murals depicting the journey of souls, a boat sailing through the sky, a heart balanced against a feather, a queen crowned in light. The same queen. She was waiting at the far end of the hall, her figure woven from mist and gold. Her eyes were gentle but vast, like the river at dusk. "You have crossed the veil again," she said, "not to seek treasure,
but to listen. That is why you are allowed to walk here." Amir bowed his head. "Why me?" The queen smiled. "Because you still hear the river. Most have forgotten its voice." She raised her hand and the air rippled. Images appeared, villages lost to time, songs fading from human lips, stories crumbling in the dust. "Each forgotten story is a brick taken from this temple," she whispered. "And when the last story fades, the temple will vanish too." Amir's heart ached. "What can I do?" "Remember," she said simply, "and tell what you remember. Speak softly, but never stop." The walls began to glow brighter, every symbol stirring awake. The melody he had heard by the Nile returned, wrapping around him like silk. It was the song beneath the sand, now louder, fuller, alive. The queen's image flickered as the music swelled. "Go back to your world," she said. "Carry the song with you. Let it become a bridge for those who still dream." A single tear rolled down Amir's cheek. When it touched the floor, the temple shimmered and dissolved into light. He awoke on the riverbank. Dawn had not yet come, but the stars were dimming. In his hand lay a fragment of white stone, etched with a symbol of an open eye. He held it close to his chest and listened. The river was silent, yet in that silence he heard it all. The queen's voice, the hum of the temple, the endless song that flowed through time. He smiled softly. "I remember." The days that followed blurred into gold and shadow. Amir spoke to no one about what he had seen. How could he? How could words describe the light that moves through dreams, or the sound of a voice that comes from water? Yet every night he returned to the Nile. He would sit there quietly, the stone with the open eye resting in his hand, waiting for the air to change. Sometimes the wind carried the scent of lotus, sometimes nothing at all. But always there was that feeling, as if something vast and invisible was breathing with him. One night a heavy mist rolled across the river. It came without warning, thick and pale like milk. Amir could not see the opposite bank. The world had turned into silence. He stood. "Queen?" he whispered. The mist stirred, and a faint figure appeared, not as bright as before, fainter, trembling, almost human. "You remembered," she said, her voice like wind in reeds. "But memory has a price." He stepped forward, confused. "Remain?" She smiled, that same ancient, gentle smile that held the power of 1,000 sunsets. "The river gives, but it also takes. To keep the song alive, something must remain in the water." Amir Ranane, his pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "You have walked between worlds too many times. The river now knows your name." The ground beneath his feet rippled like water. He staggered back, but the air itself felt heavy, as if pulling him downward. "No," he said softly, "I still have to tell them. I have to tell your story. And you will, in every whisper of the Nile, in every dream that listens." She reached out her hand. The moment he touched it, the mist exploded into light. The sound of rushing water filled his ears.
He felt the world dissolve, sand, stars, river, all blending into one endless hum. Then, silence. At sunrise, fishermen found an empty boat drifting near the riverbank. Inside, it lay only a small white stone carved with an open eye, and a green scarab polished by time. No one knew who had left it there, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows from the desert and the Nile grows quiet, people say they hear a voice, calm, steady, ancient. The sand remembers what the world forgets. And the river seems to hum a little louder, as if pleased that someone is still listening. A century later, a young archaeologist named Layla stood on the same riverbank. She had come to Luxor chasing legends, stories her grandfather once told her, stories about a man who spoke with the Nile. That night, as she sat by the water, a faint melody drifted through the reeds. She smiled, eyes half closed. I remember. And far beneath the surface, something stirred, a shadow, or perhaps a reflection, watching, waiting, whispering her name.